CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Chinese foreign minister is in Burkina Faso for his Africa tour. The UN to send a new envoy to Somalia after the expulsion of Nicholas Haysom. And the Democratic Republic of Congo election results delayed amid UN concern. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, former Credit Suisse bankers arrested in London for fraud involving begins preparations for the Paralympics qualifiers. In our top story this hour, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on an official visit to Burkina Faso. Wang has held talks with his Burkinabe counterpart, Alpha Barry, regional security, reforming the UN Security Council, as well as strengthening bilateral ties topped the agenda. The Chinese diplomat also had a brief meeting with Burkina Faso President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. The two nations resumed diplomatic ties in May last year. A lot has been achieved since then. China has not only sent a medical team and agricultural experts to the West African nation, but is also building a new modern hospital in the city of Bobo-Dioulasso. Burkina Faso is one of the 5 countries that comprise the G5 counter-terrorism force in the Sahel region, and China has allocated over $40 million to support capacity building of that Sahel G5 joint force. Well, meanwhile, the Chinese Embassy and the Brightness Project team, the Wenzhou Medical University, has donated medical equipment to one of the biggest referral hospitals in Burkina Faso. The highly advanced equipment is worth about $364,000 and will be used for patients who need cataract surgery. It is part of an initiative by the Chinese government which offers free cataract treatment. The project was launched in Burkina Faso towards the end of last month, and already over 100 patients have received help so far. Now, the Brightness Project covers 17 countries in Africa, with 7,000 cataract surgeries conducted so far. And from Burkina Faso, Wang Yi will head to the Gambia. China resumed ties with the West African nation in 2016 after the Gambia ended formal relations with Taiwan. Last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Gambian counterpart, Adama Barrow, met for the first time after the conclusion of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing. Now, the countries signed various agreements to increase cooperation. In the 2 years since resuming diplomatic ties, the nations have seen bilateral relations develop positively. The Gambian government adheres to the One China policy, and China supports the Gambian government's efforts in building the new Gambia, as well as efforts to enhance peace and security, investing in people-to-people exchanges, telecommunications and infrastructure development. The United Nations Secretary General will appoint a new envoy to Somalia to replace Nicholas Haysom, who has been expelled by the East African country. Somalia's government had declared Haysom persona non grata after he raised questions about the detention of a political candidate and the security forces' response to ensuing demonstrations. Our UN correspondent Liling Tan has those details from New York.
Chief Antonio Guterres on Friday expressed deep regret at Somalia's decision to expel his envoy to the country and stated his intent to appoint a replacement. But in comments issued 2 days after Somalia's government expelled Nicholas Haysom, the Secretary General stood by him. Guterres said he has full confidence in the South African lawyer and diplomat who has served as UN envoy to Somalia and head of the UN mission there since September last year. Guterres also pointed out that the doctrine of persona non grata per the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations only applies to diplomats from a country, and since the UN is not a country, it does not apply to UN personnel. Nevertheless, the UN chief said the Somali people and the UN mission there remain a priority, and he would name a new envoy soon. Haysom was earlier accused of undermining the sovereignty of Somalia after he raised concerns about the detention of a former al-Shabaab rebel who tried to run for office. Mukhtar Robo's detention prompted deadly clashes in December between his supporters and the government. Haysom had criticized the crackdown and called for an investigation into civilian deaths. At a UN Security Council meeting this week on Somalia, Haysom and Somalia's UN ambassador had strong words.
Allegations of interference by the federal government and the violence which erupted following the arrest of one of the candidates, a former al-Shabaab deputy leader, marred the process and does not bode well for the upcoming electoral processes in other regions or for the 2020 national elections.
While we strive to reestablish the rule of law and end of culture of impunity, we reject the criticism and attempt to rebrand renewed terrorism as an ice cream salesperson without redeeming themselves.
Somalia's ambassador said the UN representative has a duty and an obligation to not interfere in his country's internal affairs. Li Lingtan, CGTN, New York.
Now, the Electoral Commission in the Democratic Republic of Congo says that the results expected on Sunday may be delayed. The process has been described as generally calm but tense ahead of that announcement.
Sishekedi Shilombo 123 votes, Ramazani Shadari 30 votes.
The head of the Electoral Commission says counting centers were still awaiting for more than 80% of the vote tallies to be submitted by the local polling stations. This, he says, may cause a delay in the announcement of the result.
We don't know how long it will take to compile the results, but there's a lot of work to do. Even if they say they will give results on Sunday, we don't think it will be possible because we only started today. And until now, in the Mount Amba district, where we have 904 polling stations, we still haven't got through to 100. So we don't know what day we will finish.
The government shut down the internet, saying it feared the publication of results on social media from varying polling stations would create chaos. CENI spokesperson Jean-Pierre Kalamba said the organization refused to publish trends in case they were misinterpreted by the public.
The situation remains calm but very tense ahead of the announcement of the results of the elections. There are preliminary reports of some pockets of violence and, people being injured.
The United Nations, however, remains concerned about the situation in the country.
Intimidation and harassment against journalists, opposition candidates and human rights defenders continues to take place. And this being a very sensitive, as I said, very tense period, we are concerned that these efforts to silence dissent could backfire considerably when the results are announced. And we are watching carefully, and we are calling on all sides to refrain from the use of violence.
The opposition has also complained of irregularities in the election to find a successor to President Joseph Kabila, who is stepping down after 17 years in office. This may count as DR Congo's first orderly transfer of power since it gained independence in 1960. No Makugo, CGTN.
In the meantime, the United Nations Security Council has held a closed-door meeting in connection with last Sunday's elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, it is the first meeting of the UN powerhouse for South Africa in its third term as a non-permanent member of the 15-nation body. Here's more from CGTN's Li Lingtan.
The messy, if you will, the messy post-election situation on the ground in the DRC appears to be causing nervousness here at the United Nations in New York, and the 15-member council will be meeting behind closed doors in a few hours to talk about the election, but also the delay in releasing the results, as well as determine if and how it should respond. Now, of primary concern, of course, is the risk that these ongoing tensions could escalate and result in the kind of deadly clashes and protests that we have seen in the past. Now, as it stands, we've heard the situation remains calm, but tension has been brewing, and a spate of contradictory positions from different government agencies and religious bodies hasn't helped matters very much. We know, of course, the DRC's Electoral Commission had said that the results may be delayed. You just talked about this, may be delayed past Sunday. Their contention is that the information coming from polling station isn't coming in fast enough. But the powerful Catholic Church in the country has contradicted this, saying that it knows who won the elections. The National Episcopal Conference of Congo is calling on the government or the Electoral Commission to release those results. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the direction this could go, and the UN Security Council is effectively meeting behind closed doors so they can candidly discuss what to do, how to do it, and also kind of preview or prepare the way for a bigger open public meeting that's scheduled for Tuesday for the Security Council to discuss the DRC issue. We've heard earlier from the UN spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani. She has said that although there have been reports that the situation is calm despite tensions, there have also been media reports of pockets of violence as well as people being injured. Now, she warned the DRC government that efforts to silence dissent could potentially backfire. Now, her comments come amid reports that journalists and opposition candidates are being harassed and intimidated, that the internet has been cut and media broadcasters have been blocked. So the United Nations Office of Human Rights, while it has a presence there, hasn't really been involved in the election process, but they do have observers on the ground, and these monitoring mechanisms, these observers are worried about the potential for the tension to escalate and blow over and effectively deprive the people of the DRC a peaceful political transition.
Well, let's return now to our top story this hour, and that, of course, is State Councillor and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Burkina Faso for a working visit. Now, of course, the two countries, China and Burkina Faso, have only recently re-established ties in May last year, and so this visit is seen as an important opportunity to really strengthen ties and future relations between the two countries. Now, for more on this, we're joined by CGTN's Penina Karibe. She's live for us in the capital, Ouagadougou. Penina, the Foreign Minister has, as we understand, already held a series of high-level engagements with officials in the country. Just give us more details on the outcomes of those meetings.
Well, Lindy, it was a very short but intense meeting, or visit, I should say, for Minister Wang Yi. He arrived here about 1300 GMT yesterday and immediately hit the ground running. He had a meeting with his counterpart, Foreign Minister Alpha Bari. They had some discussions, and what topped the agenda really during that meeting was the importance of the two countries re-establishing diplomatic ties, with Burkina Faso saying that this was pegged on the need for the country's development. Now, Minister Wang Yi also talking about the re-establishment of what he called mutual exchanges in various fields. He didn't really go into the details as of which fields those are, but what we've seen on the ground so far, Lindy, is that the medical field, for instance, has already received a lot of boost from China. Medical doctors coming in, very specialized doctors from China, donation of equipment as well to one of the biggest hospitals here in Ouagadougou, and of course a talk to have this program that will be training medical students and as well doctors in very highly specialized fields such as surgery and very many other medical fields. So that's one of the fields that there is already tangible results. And of course we had Wang Yi saying that the decision to establish these diplomatic ties between these two countries is a very wise decision, saying that already there should be benefits being seen from very early stages. Then after that meeting, Lindy, Foreign Minister Wang Yi paid a visit to his host, the Burkina Faso President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. Kabore, of course, saying that a top priority for Burkina Faso is peace and security. This is a country that is struggling with militancy. As we speak right now, there is a state of emergency in the north. And apart from that, we know that Burkina Faso is a member of the Sahel G5. Now, previously, China couldn't really contribute much to this outfit that was established to fight Boko Haram and such like outfits here in in the western region of Africa. But now we heard from Minister Wang Yi saying that China is now willing to contribute significantly to that very sensitive issue of peace and security in this region. And of course, Burkina Faso president saying that in return, they want to enhance political ties with China based on the One China policy, saying that they do recognize there's only one China and that they want the two parties, China and Burkina Faso, to advance, to develop, to grow as well, to enjoy the people-to-people exchanges, Lindy.
So much covered in such a short period of time, Penina. Just considering how young this relationship is between China and Burkina Faso, how would you describe relations between the two, the current state of the relationship and the extent to which Burkina Faso may see a very big change in its future fortunes?
Well, you know, when President Kabore spoke yesterday, Lindy, after that meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he did say that it's about time. He did say that Burkina Faso's decision was not based on any pressure from any outside forces, but their need as a country to grow and to develop, to open themselves up to trade. And he said they are looking forward as a country to start getting those benefits for the common citizen on the ground, to start enjoying those benefits. Now, one of the flagship projects that we understand so far, besides the health sector, is also infrastructure. That's still a very big problem here in Burkina Faso. We understand, Lindy, that China is in talks to construct a railway from one of the very important regions here in Burkina Faso in the north. This is a region that is very rich with manganese, and the country is planning to actually export that. Now, this has been quite a task for them because they have to get their goods from Cote d'Ivoire, from Cameroon. Those are the neighboring countries, given Burkina Faso is landlocked. And so they want a railway constructed so that they open up that region. It will be easier for them to do trade. We also understand there is a road being constructed all the way from here going to Cote d'Ivoire. These are projects that the government of China will be undertaking very soon. So the president here of Burkina Faso is saying that they do know that these relations with China will translate into tangible benefits. And already when you interact with people on the ground, Lindy, some of them, especially the businessmen, will tell you that it has now become very easy for them to travel to China to get their merchandise, to be able to trade. This was previously very difficult and very expensive for them. They had to go to other neighboring countries, for instance, to just get a visa to go to China. So already people here are feeling that they are already getting benefits of these ties they're enjoying with China, and looking forward as well to what they're calling long-term development. That is what we heard from President Kabore yesterday when he summed up their decision to re-establish ties with China, Lindy.
And certainly that decision has seen that relationship get off to a very positive start. Thanks very much, Penina Karibe, live for us there in Ouagadougou. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, Egypt and Israel reportedly cooperating against ISIL militants in the Sinai. And the latest on the doctor strike in Zimbabwe as a pay row continues.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? To you, matters to us. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has confirmed for the first time that his military is working in cooperation with Israel in efforts to fight extremists in Egypt's North Sinai. Al-Sisi's remarks were made during an interview with American broadcaster CBS. Cairo has been heavily engaged in a war against militant groups affiliated to ISIL. Here's Adel Al-Mahroui with more.
Cairo has never commented before on reports that it is cooperating with the Israeli Defense Forces to fight militants in the Sinai. At least it has not commented yet. American broadcaster CBS says that in a televised interview with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, he has confirmed that the Egyptian Armed Forces is working with the Israelis to counter terrorism and fight ISIL militants in North Sinai. According to the network, when el-Sisi was asked if the cooperation with Israel was at its closest, the Egyptian president responded that was correct. The network went on to say that the Israelis were allowed to airstrike some locations in the Sinai. It hasn't, however, attributed this information to the Egyptian president. It's not the first time that the information about Israeli aerial strikes against militants in Egypt has been reported. Although not announced in details, cooperation between the two states has been clear. The peace treaty between Egypt and Israel does not allow Cairo to have heavy military presence in North Sinai. Yet Egypt has been holding a massive military operation against militants for almost a year now. CBS claims that Cairo has requested that the interview would not be aired. The Egyptian government has not yet made any public announcement about the issue. Adel Mahmoui, CGTN, Cairo.
The German government representatives have urged Europe to act as an NGO ship from the German charity Sea-Watch remains stranded at sea. The ship is carrying 32 migrants and it's been at sea since December 22nd. Both Italy and Malta have refused to offer a safe port of call. German politicians boarded Sea-Watch 3 on Friday in order to see the situation for themselves. Now, German parliamentarians for the Social Democrats have urged governments to act immediately in order to prevent a humanitarian crisis.
It's a humanitarian task to act now. There's no possibility of delay, and we can't say we have to find a collective European systematic solution. We must act now. It's for saving people. The second thing is we need a system. We need a functioning system of receiving people, and it must work on land and not on the sea. We must end this catastrophe of having once again these situations on the sea, and we must do it as fast as possible.
Now, Zimbabwe's government is on the verge of breaking an impasse with striking junior doctors following a meeting between the First Lady and leaders of the Hospital Doctors Association, which ended in an expression of willingness to put patients first. Now, before the meeting, government had invited applications from candidates who've completed 5 years in medical school to mitigate this medical emergency.
Casualty wards where the infirm are meant to find relief are turning them away as the doctors' strike enters its 5th week. Patients are being referred to private facilities, while those who don't have the means are left stranded.
We were told that they can't help us here because there aren't any doctors. When I heard that, I didn't know what to do or where to go next. That's why I had to sit down here and try to gather my thoughts.
Juliet has accompanied her 63-year-old mother on the 267-kilometer journey from Mutare. The hospital there couldn't attend to the septic tumor growing on her leg and referred her here, where she's enduring more distress. The leg is very painful, she says. She hasn't been prescribed any medication for the pain. Her plight is unlikely to improve as doctors stay away from the wards. Government says it's met 8 of their 10 demands, including provision of adequate drugs and equipment and facilitating a duty-free vehicle import scheme. However, the main outstanding issue, a demand for payment of salaries in US dollars, is out of the government's reach. The impasse has ground operations at some facilities to a halt. This is one of the country's largest public referral hospitals where other professionals, including consultants and senior doctors, radiographers and hospital registrars, are said to have also downed their tools in solidarity with their junior counterparts. While sympathizing with their cause, desperate patients want the doctors to compromise.
There is nothing I can do to heal this wound or ease my mother's pain. It's literally rotting while I am looking on. It will end up needing amputation given how far the decay has gone.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa has cut short his annual leave to deal with the crisis. His intervention will hopefully bring the quick resolution that could save this leg and many lives that are in danger. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Tunisia is hosting the Democratic Unity Forum for Libya, and prominent Libyan politicians, tribal leaders, activists, state officials and parliamentarians are attending the event. They're discussing ways of reviving the peace process in the North African state. Libyans have insisted on national sovereignty and rejected any foreign interference. Tunisia has urged all Libyan stakeholders to sit at the negotiating table to prevent an escalation of the armed conflict, which has caused unprecedented political, social, economic and security concerns.
This forum aims to bring peace to Libya and to preserve liberty for the people. All Libyans want to overcome the difficulties faced by our country.
We welcome any peace initiative. We don't need the UN or any foreign interference by states or political entities in Libya's internal affairs. Now, Libya needs its sons, daughters, elderly people and children.
Meanwhile, Tunisian activist Aya Chebi has become the African Union's first youth envoy. The position was created to mobilize young people across the continent, inspiring change among young people.
Tunisian activist Aya Chebi was appointed in November as the first ever African Union youth envoy. 706 young people submitted their applications to the AU. 17 were shortlisted. 4 candidates were interviewed by a panel of 14 people from different commissions and departments.
I think the world also should recognize when these kind of transparent, rigorous processes happen and give young people the leadership position they deserve by merit, based on their experience, based on their skill set.
The 31-year-old is grateful to the African Union for the huge responsibility. She views her appointment as a message of hope to millions of young people in Africa.
I think that's a good message. That's a strong message coming from the African Union. It's for African youth. You can be whatever you want to be. You can be whatever you want. You just have to do 2 things. Find your identity and live your mission. Whatever position you hold, it's part of your journey to achieve your mission.
The peace activist believes that the positive change needs youth involvement. She dreams of a cultural, economic and political revolution led by the new generation of Africans.
We talk today about entrepreneurship, we talk about innovation, the tech revolution. Everything has to have a youth face because young people are the most affected and because they are the ones who bring the dynamism and the spirit of change.
The youngest diplomat at the AU Commission Chairperson's cabinet is one of the most influential Africans, who has inspired many people, especially women, to pursue their higher education and to serve noble causes.
Aya's African activism started in 2011. She spent 8 years traveling across the continent, training young people on a couple of Pan-African initiatives and coaching the next generation to be positive change agents. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Sidi Boussaïd, Tunis.
Recapping your top stories this hour, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on an official visit to Burkina Faso. Wang has held talks with his Burkina counterpart Alpha Barry. Regional security, reforming the UN Security Council, as well as strengthening bilateral ties, topped the agenda. Now, the Chinese diplomat also had a brief meeting with Burkina Faso President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. The two nations resumed diplomatic ties in May last year. The United Nations Secretary General will appoint a new envoy to Somalia to replace Nicholas Haysom, who has been expelled by the East African country. Somalia's government has declared Haysom persona non grata after he raised questions about the detention of a political candidate and the security forces' response to ensuing demonstrations. UN Chief Antonio Guterres on Friday expressed deep regret at Somalia's decision to expel his envoy. And Zimbabwe's government is on the verge of breaking an impasse with striking junior doctors following the meeting between the First Lady and leaders of the Hospital Doctors Association. The meeting ended with an expression of willingness to put patients first. Now, ahead of that meeting, government had invited applications from interns or candidates who had completed 5 years of medical school to mitigate the medical emergency. And that's a look at some of the top stories we're following this hour. Coming up in your business news. Former Credit Suisse bankers arrested in London for fraud involving state companies in Mozambique.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
44-year-old Surjan Singh and 37-year-old Detalina Sobeva. They were arrested 5 days after former Mozambican Finance Minister Manuel Chang was arrested in South Africa as part of the same indictment. Prosecutors say at least $200 million was diverted to the defendants and other Mozambican government officials. They also say the defendants concealed the misuse of funds. Now,
the growth of coding signifies the importance of regional integration.
The EAC and COMESA, the regional market, has become strong for us. Two, that not only is it taking food and primary products, but we're exporting manufactured products.
Trade experts say the export of value-added products is creating more jobs for locals, but also earning the country more money. Uganda is also looking to tap into new markets, such as China, to promote non-food products like tourism.
Over the last 30 years and more, China has gotten more than 400 million people out of poverty. So the incomes have risen. And when incomes rise, this is an opportunity to also begin to travel, to go and relax and chill. And Uganda is one of the countries you want to come and chill in.
However, as exports grow, Uganda's import bill remains significantly high, largely for the import of raw materials, but also cheap alternatives to locally manufactured products. But for exporters like Thomas Yiga, keeping the quality of their products is key in penetrating and maintaining their export markets. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Senior bankers in Britain are facing criminal charges for committing fraud during the country's financial crisis over a decade ago. Former Barclays CEO John Varley and 3 one-time colleagues faced trial over deals with Qatari investors to secure cash injections that allowed the bank to survive the crisis. Barclays Bank secured about $15 billion in emergency funds from mainly Gulf investors as markets in the UK plunged. The trial is scheduled to start on Monday next week and is slated to last for up to 4 months. Nigeria, Ghana and other member countries of the West African Monetary Zone are working on a national currency swap agreement to promote trade in the region. A deal to that end was announced at the end of the 9th Trade Ministers Forum in Abuja, Nigeria in November last year. The currency swap deal is expected to work in a manner similar to that of the existing swap lines between some of the member states and China. The WAMZ came into force in the year 2000 as a monetary zone to promote trade among member countries. Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has addressed debt trap concerns as far as Sino-African debt is concerned. He spoke during his visit to Ethiopia on Friday.
China's position when it comes to the issue of debt with the African states. Is there any tricky agreement as it's been claimed?
You see, the temporary debt difficulties facing some African countries did not come up today or yesterday. They were built up throughout history, and actually, so far, the main data from so many African countries is still from the developed countries. And the second point I want to make is that the cooperation between China and African countries is a friendly cooperation of mutual assistance. It's a type of South-South cooperation, and we follow the principles of mutual assistance in having cooperation with African countries. And in helping Ethiopia and other African countries' projects at the request of our African brothers and sisters, and we only start those projects after we have conducted feasibility studies and scientific assessments and evaluations. So our cooperation is open and transparent. And certainly how to help those African countries overcome these temporary financing difficulties. I think the answer is very clear. That is, we need to help them build up their own development capacity so as to make sure that they can generate economic growth from within their countries. At last year's FOCAC Beijing summit, China announced 8 major initiatives to help Africa to do so, and I believe that through their efforts, many of the African countries, including those that are currently facing debt difficulties, will achieve new and greater development success.
And to some small business news now. A family-owned retailer in Egypt has been in operation for many decades, providing custom-made shirts to the public. The shop once served wealthy Egyptians during the time of late President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Here's their story.
Makram Williams strives to promote individuality and self-expression through his custom-made shirts. The family-owned retail shop was established by his father in 1967, catering to individuals who want to make a statement through fashion.
During the days of my father, he used to work with artists such as Mohammed Abdel Wahab. He also worked with Dr. Taha Hussein. He used to work with President Gamal Abdel Nasser, as well as people in government institutions and diplomats. They are all well known. I took over after him. I used to deal with Mr. Farid al-Atrash, people who are very chic.
The shop's clientele has featured famous authors, actors, diplomats, and even presidents. With his vintage shop, William hopes to preserve his father's legacy in the current competitive market. He exports his custom-made shirts to Europeans who value the locally sourced Egyptian cotton material. Even though machines produce more merchandise, the detail and finish produced through manual tailoring is evident.
Back in the day, tailors used to hold a fitting for shirts, just like they did with suits. The Italians used to be here, so were the Armenians, holding fittings for shirts until they reached the best fit. That is when they deliver it to you. The shirts were handmade, they did not only use machines. The machine gives you products faster, it throws products right at you. Handmade work, however, gives you less merchandise, but delivers high-quality products. That is the secret of our industry. I hope that we can preserve it and teach it.
William sees a place for art in the tailoring business, despite cheaper, ready-made imports dominating the Egyptian market.
The man working in the shirt business has to be an artistic man. He has to be a craftsman. He has to be a skilled man to be able to produce good merchandise.
At his downtown Cairo store, the grey-haired tailor continues to follow in his father's footsteps, treating the process of shirt making like an art. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Up next on Africa Live. South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, has just signed a record deal.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Hundreds of young people from the African continent are meeting in Accra for the 10th Ghana International Model United Nations Conference. Now, the event aims to encourage the next generation of leaders to get involved in global issues. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Modeling Ewuku is leading a plenary session on women's empowerment at this Model UN conference in the Ghanaian capital. Since it was established in 2007, the conference has set out to equip young people with diplomatic skills.
It has actually helped boost my confidence because most of the time you have ideas you want to put across, but you don't have the right avenue to bring them out. So during the Model UN conference, we discuss pertinent issues which is disturbing in the various countries and then various nations at large.
The conference is a simulation of specialized bodies of the United Nations. At this plenary session, delegates are discussing the Sustainable Development Goal on gender inequality.
My position as being the president for UN Women, other women who thought it's an intimidating position right now are encouraged to go for it.
Delegates also learn more about how the global body handles global affairs. The Ghana International Model United Nations Conference is a platform where the youth drawn from the African continent hone their skills in leadership. Participants say with the knowledge gained at the conference, they are more determined to contribute to the development of their respective countries. Organizers of the conference say it's an opportunity to prepare young people for diplomacy.
These are the platforms where young people, be they students or workers, come together to brainstorm, to think on issues that they are facing in their countries, their communities, and find ways and means to solve those issues. And at the end of everything, we come up with a resolution that is sent to the United Nations to tell them what the young people that we stand for.
With the experience gained from UN model conferences, modeling now works for the United Nations Development Program in Ghana, and she hopes to build a long career with the UN as a result. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now to South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma, who is implicated in a major corruption scandal, has been given a taxpayer-funded record deal.
As president, Jacob Zuma was famous for singing at political rallies. His trademark was the controversial anti-apartheid song, Umshini Wami, or Bring Me My Machine Gun. And now he's signed a record deal, and it looks like it will be funded by South African taxpayers. The eThekwini municipality, covering the city of Durban, has agreed for Zuma to record an album of protest songs. A senior manager tweets that the aim is to preserve the country's heritage. As a high-ranking member of the ANC imprisoned alongside Nelson Mandela, Jacob Zuma is well-versed in anti-apartheid songs, but he's also currently embroiled in a major multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. Opposition politicians have reacted with outrage and promised to fight the record deal. Councillor Nicola Graham of the Democratic Alliance has called the municipality's move an ANC slush fund.
Now, with performances by contemporary African dance greats such as Jermaine Akogni, the 12th edition of the Dialogue de Corps festival recently held in Burkina Faso showed why it's still one of the continent's leading contemporary dance events.
At 74, Jermaine Akogni is known as the mother of African contemporary dance, and she moves like someone half her age. Her style has its roots in African dance and drumming traditions, but it's blended with modern and urban techniques, something she believes helps to continue the rich heritage.
We were amongst the first ones who wanted to change traditional African dance and take it further. So I went a little further with what my ancestors had done and took African dance to another level. Dance is linked to what is happening and must reflect the times. Dance today continues to evolve. We also have to adapt and reflect the current environment.
Akogni's latest performance was at this year's Dialogue du Corps in Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou. It brings together dancers and choreographers from across the world every year, performing for hundreds of fans.
Dance, just like theatre and cinema, is something that frees you up. I came tonight to free myself and to let myself go and be transported into the universe of joy.
Et j'ai été pleinement satisfait, pleinement rempli de cela.
This year's festival explored a particularly relevant theme, migration, an issue tens of millions of Africans are dealing with, both inside the continent and out. As well as an African artistic platform, festivals like Dialogue du Corps give younger dancers an opportunity to learn from older, more experienced choreographers. And it's a chance for Akogni to help pass on and continue the long tradition. Edmond Nyabola, CGTN.
Your sports news is still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, South Africa's national wheelchair basketball team begins preparations for the Paralympics qualifiers.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
In your sports news, wheelchair basketball is one of the most popular sports among athletes with disabilities. In South Africa, the national team, known as the Amawila Boys, are training hard ahead of their Paralympic qualifiers for Tokyo 2020. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
The action is fast, noisy and often fierce. These are the Amawila Boys, and they've set their sights on one of the sport's highest achievements, a place at the Tokyo Paralympics in 2020.
I think internationally South Africa are on the rise. I can see within the group that's about to go for the qualifications for Tokyo, there's a real passion, there's a real hunger within a core of the players, and that's going to carry them a long way. If they can get that together with some hard work between now and then I can see them regaining that championship of Africa that they desperately want. And from there, you know, the world's their stage.
For more than 40 years, South African teams have dominated on the continent, qualifying for all Paralympics apart from Rio 2016. But with only one African slot for the men's and women's teams, a lot is at stake.
It's quite a difficult process for Africa. In World's wheelchair basketball, Africa has one qualification spot for the men and for the women. So we have to win the African Championships. Bottom line, we have to beat the likes of Algeria, Morocco, Egypt to qualify.
The team are under no illusions of the difficulty of the task ahead.
Our preparation actually started in the middle of the year. The team travelled through to Dubai and we played in an international, quite a competitive tournament. Ended up 5th there. So now we're invited to a tournament in Angola where we're going to take on, it's a Tri-Nation series against Angola and Switzerland.
The tough training aside, Amawila boys want to inspire a nation and help others with disabilities.
The drive of Sasol is for the limitless, is for people to put the spotlight on wheelchair basketball, to get the country behind the national team and to get the guys actually that's out there that doesn't know even about wheelchair basketball and it's disabled, to get them in and get them to play wheelchair basketball.
It's a very great initiative, you know, because it shows how they believe in people with disabilities, how we can empower ourselves, how we can show the world that there's nothing impossible, that we have things that we can do. And wheelchair basketball is one of those sports where they're doing incredible things.
The team are certainly not lacking in ambition. And while there are still 2 years to go, Amawila boys are hopeful that their 2020 dream will come true, confident in the knowledge that South Africans will be right behind them. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And let's go to Argentina now, where former striker and coach Diego Maradona has been discharged from hospital after being admitted on Friday with bleeding in his stomach. Maradona was undergoing a routine medical exam when doctors discovered the problem, but sources close to the former